Hello and welcome to the Business of Meaning podcast. I'm your host, Eric Rosenberg. Over the years, I've had the privilege of helping businesses in the meetings and event industry grow and succeed. And I'm excited to share that experience with you. If you feel alone and overwhelmed, and if you're looking to take your business to the next level, improve your strategy and sales, and connect with like minded professionals, you are in the right place. I invite you to visit eventbusinessformula.com and join our community of event business owners dedicated to exponential growth. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meaning podcast. And today I'm absolutely delighted to speak with a rock star in our industry. I've known her for years. She is one of the top lawyer, if not the top lawyer in our industry. We're going to talk about her journey. We're going to talk about what it is to own your own business. And we're going to talk about what you should be thinking about when you own your own business with no one else than the one and only Barbara Dunn. Barbara, it's so great to have you on the podcast today.
It's a pleasure to be with you and for all of our listeners today.
And so we've known each other for years, but I never knew about your own personal journey and how you end up being a lawyer in our industry. So, what is your journey?
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy to share my journey with you. And I, like you, Eric, find it very interesting when folks tell me about their journey. Some folks' have path is very straight and direct, and others it curves around. And yet we're all in the same place. So I'm very fortunate to get to work in the meetings industry. This is my 33rd year practicing as a lawyer. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but not necessarily what type of law that I wanted to practice. And so it wasn't really until I got to law school in my first semester started discovering the core classes, one of which is contracts. And that really clicked with me. I'd had some business law classes in undergrad, and so a lot of the concepts made sense to me, and I liked that. I could tell already far more that I liked litigation. I liked helping clients more than getting into arguments, although the job involves both sometimes. And so I was fortunate when I needed a part time job during law school that I found myself at the local boutique firm, Howe and Hutton, run by Jonathan Howe, who many of your listeners will know
Yes.
as just the esteemed colleague to the industry for all of us, and his partner, Terry Hutton. So I was fortunate to get to work at Howe and Hutton for 23 years, which includes my time during law school. And what I found in working there is really the understanding and depth of knowledge of not only nonprofit organizations and the legal work there, but those groups that have the meetings, conventions, and trade shows. And I had firsthand writing articles, talking to clients, right on, it's a sink or swim approach. And I learned so much through that process. And as I learned, I developed the skill set and the confidence like so many folks do. And so when I had an opportunity to move over to a larger firm, Barnes and Thornburg, I was fortunate to accept that opportunity and get to work with another industry mentor, Paula Getter, work with her alongside for many years. Again, learn more things, also become a mentor for lots of new lawyers and colleagues, which really excites me. So I'm happy to do that and really watch that practice grow over a long time. But Eric, owning a business has always been a goal of mine. And in the last year and a half, I kind of got to the point in myself of saying, if not now, when? And I was very fortunate to have the confidence and support of my family and industry peers and colleagues behind me. And what I knew at that point in my practice is that it's the meetings and travel work, among all the work that I've done over the years, that I really want to hone in on, that I really want to specialize in, and that I really want to customize and personalize for my clients. And a lot of that just can't be done in a larger platform. So this was an opportunity to hang my shingle at last. Very scary and exciting at the same time. So here brings me my journey. I'm just shortly into the new business. I'm grateful for the continued support of the community. And it's talking with folks like you, Eric, and other industry professionals that keeps me grounded, it keeps me in reality with client problems and challenges. And so I feel very focused that my journey led me to chatting with you today.
Wonderful, and I'm delighted we can talk. As in your capacity of as a business owner, what are you thinking now about how you grow the business? How you're gonna find the clients? Because obviously, before it might not have been your main responsibility, or there was other people doing it in the firm. So how are you thinking now about growing the business and finding new clients?
Absolutely. So, thinking about growing the business, as you point out, even in a large firm environment, we certainly maintained and grew our practices. And that's a passion of mine, just generally being entrepreneurial. So I had that, but what you learn in your own business, of course, is doing the day-to-day administrative aspects of running a business that in a large firm you don't need to worry about. You don't need to think about. So, coming over as a lawyer, I was fortunate to have clients that wanted to continue to work with me. And at the same time, since I started the business, I've attracted new clients. Primarily, I've attracted them through the way I have over many years now, fortunately, word of mouth, recommendations from other clients and industry professionals. But I have definitely dipped into social media and launched a lot of content that I've had in the past, webinars, articles, looking at doing, industry focused things with professionals like yourself. And that also has attracted, and my hope is that it will attract new clients. And as I often share with folks that are coming up in the industry, or even just lawyers practicing in any field, you got to plant the seeds along the way. Some things are going to sprout right away. Other
Yeah.
things you might think will never sprout. And yet, there will be a day, likely in them knowing that you're out there and doing the work, that you will reconnect. And so that's how I view it, Eric, in terms of cultivating the business. Now, I understand the delicate balance between working on your business and working in your business.
Absolutely.
I'm learning that. Yep.
Absolutely. No, what you say is it's exactly the same for any small business owner, and definitely for small entrepreneur in our industry, even solopreneur, it is exactly the same. Now, have you also noticed any difference in how you spend your time? Because when you own your business, there's some responsibilities. You also managing team, managing vendors. Uh, are you looking at the time you're spending to practice law, to grow the business, and to run the business?
Yes, I think that is an important component, just in the manner that you described it, Eric, is that, I start the better part of my day on and off on the business, ending with the business, everything from opening files to making sure bills and payments are processed. But in between, I've got the practice time set up. So my goal in any given day would be to balance the amount of time, hopefully maximize the amount of time that I bill, that's the commodity, if you will, that I sell, with the non-billable work, and also rely on others for admin support that I might not need to do myself. And
Yes,
that's, I've noticed over the last several months, a learned skill, because I think for a lot of folks, certainly myself included, the tendency might be to do it all yourself, think you can do it all yourself. But if you pause and say, what's the best way for me to maximize the value I bring to the business and value others bring to the business, and help chart that out, it makes a big difference. And, the other thing I've noticed, Eric, is how much time I spent in a larger environment on inner office emails, correspondence, meetings, all of which are necessary in a larger environment, and all of
mhm,
which that I've benefited from. But not having that has brought lots of hours back to my day, which which definitely I'll say I think about how I could best use that time each day.
That's awesome. You know, when I started my first business, corporate events agency in Brussels, the first 2 years, my thinking was, it's my brand, it's my client, it's my way of operating. Nobody does it better than me. And I was driving 150 miles an hour into a wall until I realized this is not how you grow a business. And that's unfortunately what many people starting their business do, especially coming from a large firm. So kudos to you to already put the things in place. Now, when we came from Belgium to America, my wife was a lawyer as well, and she's now a realtor with Keller Williams Luxury here in South Florida. And the number of time that, first of all, she said it's better to go and find a lawyer and speak with the lawyer before the project, before signing anything. But second, the number of time I heard an answer, which quite frankly frustrate me a lot as a business owner, but it's probably the right answer, is it depends. And those two words, like, huh. So, how can a business owners in our industry look at working with a lawyer? What is the right timing to do it? And what would you say to them when they're getting an answer? It depends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing your wife's experience. And as you saw me smile at the thought of that, the first adage being that it's easier and cheaper to keep you out of trouble than to get you out of
Yes.
trouble. And then the second, it depends, which by the way, I think one of our industry friends had given me a t-shirt at one point that said that, because I think I've said that so often as I do. Small business owner's perspective, I myself put my team just as I would an accountant and other professionals. Look, just because I'm a lawyer and I do this work doesn't mean I know what's best in starting a small business and all the various structures surrounding it. And so, while I know for a lot of individuals that can be a daunting task to think about engaging a lawyer and accountants, there are lots of resources out there. And I encourage talking to friends, first of all, others that own businesses, and making some outreach to different lawyers. Lawyers, despite the reputation, I think lawyers are very open to having exploratory calls and conversations with potential clients, not on the clock. So finding a lawyer that's a really good fit that knows what you want, and then understanding how they bill. Are they billing on an hourly basis? Are they billing on a flat fee basis? You never want to get those skis out in front of you. So making sure that you know going in what that process is going to look like. But putting the lawyer on your team early on is so much better because I know and working with my clients as well, unwinding things, filings, for example, corporate filings that might not have been done right, it's probably going to take twice as much as it would be to do it right in the first place. And while I know there's lots of online resources now for small business owners, certainly many of which are good and reliable, it's nice to have a nodding head saying, yes, that's what I would do, or yes, I agree. So even a lawyer that might form a sounding board role for your company is a good strategy. And again, I think the best lawyers to me, again, are approachable, but also they're collaborators. So just like every other professional working within your business, they want to know what your goal is. They want to know how they can help. I do the same with my clients. Yes, there are still lawyers that will want to turn the meter on and run up the clock. I'd like to think their practice model is going away in favor of folks that will do things on a project basis. They're not
Mhm.
always on the clock. They want to invest time in their clients because they're in it for the long haul. So that's the type of lawyer I would encourage small business owners to look for. And again, I think mostly, and perhaps you've experienced this yourself, Eric, the peer to peer referrals to me are really valuable.
Absolutely. And what about the it depends?
Oh, the it depends. Yes. It's to your point, you have a burning question, yes or no, right? I
Yes.
had a client just the other day, yesterday, I think, say, does my force majeure clause apply in my hotel contract if, you know, uh, 30% of my people can't come to the meeting because of a government order, executive order, right? And in an email or on a phone call, The answer really has to be it depends, because in fact, it does depend on the contract language. And so oftentimes the send me the contract, the client might think, oh, groan, now you're going to spend all this time reviewing the contract. For me, that's not the case. One quick look at the contract and the provision at issue, and talking through the facts with the client, what's really going on in this executive order in my example, that really forms the basis of what should be a straightforward answer that isn't too
Mhm.
difficult to come by. The it depends, though, I think also serves another purpose, and that is for the client. It tells them what information or facts are important to know in order to answer that question. And so in a lot of cases, I'll say the it depends answer, and of course it depends on what, share what I'm looking for, and have that individual go back and gather the information so that you can arrive at an answer. So again, I think it serves that purpose. Ultimately, the lawyer, like the client, certainly wants to get to an answer, wants to help map a path, but a lot of times just right off the bat, and look, I'll say myself too, and sometimes in deference to the groan that I might get on the it depends, I'll say things like in general, right? And I'll give it an answer. But as a longtime industry colleague of mine said, the general rule applies to no one in particular.
Yeah, right.
So that answer, you could rely on it, right, to some extent, but we're back to kind of where we're started.
Yes, no, I get it. Thank you for that. I had a situation one day where this volcano in Iceland, Eyjafjallajökull, exploded, and there was a cloud of ashes all over Europe, closing one airport after the other. And we had obviously contract on a different project, and one of the five project we had the following week, I'll never forget, was an incentive trip to Vietnam. And so we work all weekend with my team. And then on Monday morning, I was driving to the client. And from my car, I call my partner in Vietnam. And I say, George, I'm getting to the client. I've talked about everything we discussed this weekend. Charles de Gaulle is closed, and we're supposed to leave from Paris on Wednesday. Even if they open, it's going to be a nightmare, and it's people are afraid to go. They don't know if they're going to be stuck in Vietnam. Are you okay that we postpone everything at no cost for the client? And he said, yes. Okay, thank you. And I arrive at the client, and I told the client what I recommend. He said, what are you recommending? I said, I think you should postpone. And so, how much is it going to cost? I said, the airline, nothing. I have the email. They're ready. It was Vietnam Airlines. They're ready to postpone at no cost. And what about the program, the hotel? And it was the Intercontinental in Hanoi, the dinner in Along Bay. I said, nothing. So, what do you mean nothing? No, I just spoke with George, where, understanding. And he said, okay. And I helped them communicate with their winners who actually were calling to thank them that they should not go at that moment. The reason I'm sharing this with you is that I never signed anything. Well, obviously, there's a contract in place for everything. But that day, that Monday morning, I didn't ask George to send me and confirm me everything on email because it was too late already. I was going to the client. And the client never asked me to confirm everything on paper, and everything went very well. And we postponed, and the whole program went well. I don't think that this would still be possible today. And is this something that would never happen in America?
Well, it's an amazing story, and I appreciate that you shared that. And I will say, stories like that certainly have happened in America, and even in and around the Icelandic volcano, the example that you mentioned. And first, from a business perspective, certainly your relationships with the client, the customer, and your partner just show the strength of the business relationships and the strength of our industry. And our
Totally.
industry obviously always stands tall in need when there's challenges, and we've lived through a lot of those. So I appreciate that very much about the industry. From a lawyer standpoint, I think you did exactly what I would advise, which is you got to focus on the practical first. We can always write something up later. We can, I often say to clients, we can always play cleanup later. But in the moment, I mean, you had
Mm.
hours really before everything was to a point of no return that you had to act and you had to mobilize. So I think that's guidance. It still happens today. We know things happen quite quickly and we need to respond quickly. And in those instances, having the ability to rely on your partners is important, but then following it up when possible with writing, even if it's simply a confirming email or a
Mhm.
text or something. And as your customers, your clients might be large corporations, their auditors are going to want to see a paper trail. They're going to want to see, tell me where it says we closed it out. And of course, the lawyers will want to see that too. But that
Mm.
doesn't all have to happen on that first day, right? That decision
Yeah.
making point. I think one thing I found, Eric, and I know you work well with your clients, and your example is a perfect one. Clients have to be prepared. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. And clients have to be prepared for the exact scenario and many others that you gave, so that if and sometimes when those situations arrive, they know who to mobilize. They know the people to mobilize on the communications team, the people to mobilize on the accounting team, on the insurance team. Sometimes some of these cancellations, involve cancellation insurance and legal team and
Yeah.
so forth. Just being able to say, we're going to invoke this plan, this strategy, have perhaps even holding statements or plans, that's significant. And the groups that invest in planning that, and certainly professionals like yourself that help guide them on that, it's a significant investment, but one worth the while, because then if you're in those short amount of time as you were, you're really not making a knee jerk reaction to the situation. You've thought this through. You've had experiences before. You've shared with the client. The client was already hearing from the winners. You talked to the boots on the ground. They were sharing with you what the issues were. So that to me is a great example, again, both of our industry, but also in the way that you could manage a potential legal issue in the moment
Mm.
and yet still go back as you might have later on to tie things up in a bow, right? To get the closure that the client might need, but feel that you have the trust to rely on it in that moment, in that day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And you just mentioned trust, which is absolutely essential, and which make me think of the counter example, trust. I remember reading one of the book of Richard Branson, "Losing My Virginity," about Virgin companies. And if I'm not mistaken, at one stage he's talking about how British Airways was trying to incentivize clients at the airport to switch from Virgin to BA, which was crazy. And he asked advice to someone and said, "Sue the bastard." And uh, being a small business, okay, and what I do now, I don't play meetings anymore, but I'm coaching business owners, small business owners, solopreneur, exclusively in our industry. And it reminds me of a story of David against Goliath. I had this client has a lot of trust in medical device company in Europe, and we were working for the European headquarters. And for years, we've been doing key opinion leader meeting, we've been doing sales meeting, we've been doing incentive, product launch for them a lot. And one day we were working on a sales meeting and they keep adding more people and adding more people. And there were even people coming from the US headquarters. And when we arrive about 2 weeks before the meeting, or 2 or 3 weeks before the meeting, it was supposed to be, I remember, at the Conrad in Istanbul. And because of the relationship I had with the hotel and with the company, and because of the relationship and the trust that I had with the client, they were keeping asking more things. We were providing. The hotel was asking for a contract signed, but because of the relationship and he knew we've done the inspection, they were holding the rooms. And then arrived a new head for Europe. He arrived on Sunday. On Monday, they were asking me 50 additional rooms. And on Wednesday, he was canceling everything. I'm like, what? And so there were obviously cancellation costs, which my counterpart in the company, I've been working for years, and there was a mutual trust. I understood that he was told by the new boss of Europe to cancel. They couldn't do anything else. And so we had finally a meeting with my contact in the company, as well as the new boss and my business partner and I. And in the middle of the conversation, I realized what was going on, and I realized how vicious this new responsible for Europe was when he said, "Well, I don't understand how you run your company if you're able to commit for such number of rooms without having us signing a contract. I didn't sign any contract. There is no cancellation cost, and you can sue us if you want." So here I am, the little company doing several millions in revenue against this gigantic company which is listed on the stock exchange. And I look at him and I said, "Please give me the name of your lawyer, because if you think that I'm going to let my reputation go down the drain because you're a liar, that is not going to happen." And 2 weeks later, they were paying all the cancellation costs. And of course, I lost the client. I knew that. So transpose this to all the solopreneurs and all the small business owners. And sometimes a big company can play the clock. They don't care about spending costs with lawyers. And so, what is your advice for small business owners in our industry to prevent such situation to happen? And or if it's not preventable, what can they do afterwards? Sorry for being long with the example, but just want to set up the context.
It is perfect, and I got excited and started smiling as you saw when I heard you asked for that name of the lawyer, because to me that's calling your bluff. And I don't play poker often, but to me that's exactly the type of approach that needed to be taken. If you dissect the situation that you encountered, certainly as you point out in your comments, having a contract at each point in that relationship, right, with that meeting, with the hotel, with the client, and so forth. Certainly, that would be my best guidance. And certainly, that's likely the way you always operated. But we all know that exceptions get made for a lot of reasons. And as a business owner, you made a business call and a judgment to do that. And the fact is that hopefully a lot of times that works out fine. But we know oftentimes making those exceptions can come back and haunt the group. But that said, what you did in your example is exactly what I would tell a client. Put your organization first, not necessarily on the financial side. I mean, certainly not downplaying that. That's going to be critical. But you just said your reputation, your integrity, your business. That's the value you have. And so the thought or narrative that all this work and investment and everything you did was all for naught, or was done in a manner that wasn't authorized, whatever the narrative is going to be or could be, you stood up to that. And that to me is a great place to start. And so often when a client calls and explains a dispute like that, I will look at it first as a business owner and ask, what's in the best interest of you personally? Sometimes you, the business. You mentioned, you lost the client. You went in knowing you're going to lose the client. Other times, maybe it's not going to play out that way. So thinking through all the business implications is important, but also calling the bluff, letting the other party know it's not personal, it's just business. Just as
Mm,
if they shared that with you, you shared that with them, because your interest in getting the information on their lawyer was, I suspect, and if you got that information and shared it with me, I would contact that lawyer from a business perspective initially. I would contact that owner and say, I've worked with this company before. I know they don't do business that way. We've got a lot of paper trail on them telling me to do all these things. And,
yeah,
the dialogue goes on from there.
yeah,
So I think you certainly, lawyers, non lawyers, don't be intimidated to ask, just as you did. Don't be intimidated to stand up for your business. That's first and foremost. Often I'll say to a client, what you provided to the client was of value. The client took that value and you're not being compensated for it in a lot of these cases in that example. So
Mm.
that needs to be addressed. And some of these fundamental arguments are important. But at the end of the day, your business, your reputation, that's really going to be important. A lot of business owners take a position too. They say, well, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to challenge it. But I'll tell you, Eric, in the example that you gave me, if you had done that in this situation, I don't know how you could do that. The likelihood of you getting any more business with this company was probably already minimal.
Absolutely.
But then I'd also like to think you planted seeds with that company with a lot of people. And when it's time to change who's in charge, one of those Alliant folks are going to be there. And that goes back to you preserving your business and your reputation. And the folks there know that no matter what the particulars of that situation are. So I think following up in the moment, as you did for a business owner that's in the face of a dispute, you didn't panic, you asked for the information. You didn't fly off the handle, you didn't send a nasty email likely. You took the information. Give yourself always time to process it. We all need time to process things. Think
Mm.
it through and then follow up with your next approach. And don't be afraid in that moment to take the information, and sometimes silence is your friend, right? Thank you very much. End the call, you end the email, whatever the case may be. That can be important because we know oftentimes over explaining and so forth can also be damaging. But I think that the example you gave again just underscores, as business owners, you have to anticipate the types of disputes that might commonly come up in your particular business and think of how you want to handle them. Just as we were talking about with a crisis management, running the drill, being prepared, and then having that voice of reason on you, that when you're in the moment and you want to click send to something, there's something that's stopping you, right? There's some reason. Maybe it's your family, friends, co-owners, whatever the case may be. Don't be shy about giving yourself that time to think it through and standing up for yourself. And the David Goliath scenarios are incredibly difficult. But in those moments, I would still tell the Davids of the world, you still can and should stand up for yourself, stand up for
Yep.
your business. Even if you say, you know what, you owe me a lot of money and we're going on record that you owe me money, but for the moment, I'm going to choose to walk away. Even if you do that, that's not a defeat. That's
Mm.
standing up in the face of that. And that's okay too. Litigation doesn't benefit anybody really, other than maybe the lawyers. And even then, it doesn't benefit the lawyers because clients aren't happy when they're in litigation.
Yeah.
So that's what we try to avoid at all costs. But I think as a business owner, just being prepared and giving yourself time in the moment is the best thing that you could do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Barbara, I'm sure you've seen many clients, many people that have been working meetings outside of the US. What would you advise a small business owner that is a third party that is working for a large firm and they're planning a meeting in Europe? And then they receive the contract and they come back with 25 pages of addendum. And in Europe, they say, 25 pages of addendum? As my friend in New Jersey said, forget about it. I'm not going to do that. And if you want those room at that venue, I'm not going to look through the 25 pages of your addendum. And then you, as a small business owner here in America, has to go back to the client and say, they don't want to look at the addendum. I'm sure you've seen that situation. And what is your advice?
Absolutely, I have seen that situation, and I think as a small business owner and doing business, in a country outside of your own, the most important thing you can do is have an understanding of the business culture and the climate there and the types of vendors that you're working with. In a lot of cases, working with a professional conference organizer or other boots on the ground in that country is probably the best thing you can do. It's the best thing the client can do. They could play a small role, they could play a large role. Now, certainly, if you have experience doing business in that particular country, perhaps that isn't needed. But the point of that is to say, we need to know, the client needs to know, what are the push buttons in that particular country? And how do we manage within that compared to what we normally see, for example, in a contract, those clauses? So, to me, it comes back, and I use this term a lot, Eric, with clients. What is your risk tolerance?
Mm.
Do you have a high level of risk tolerance? In other words, you want to book this hotel no matter what the contract says? Or do you have a very low risk tolerance? You're not willing to take any. And somewhere in between, is where companies and clients land. So doing business in a culture and an environment where you're not accustomed presents its own set of risks, yet working with a local can dispel a lot of those so that you can understand the risk. And then going back to the customer, the key would be prioritize the issues. For example, is it 100% prepayment for rooms and food and beverage, period? Is that what's important in that culture? If so, how do we manage our normal, we don't pay you anything until 60 days after, right? And how do you manage within that? What contract clauses might be relevant to that? What contract clauses don't we need? There are lots of things that might be specific to the locale in the meeting. The point is pick and choose. But the ones you're going to try to include in any contract, no matter the type, are going to be the ones that are going to help balance you out, if you will, from the risk. How much
Hmm.
risk are you willing to take? Be practical. I think the guidance that business owners can have with their clients and colleagues is to talk about risk in a way, talk about a particular type of contract and say, what's your primary risk or exposure? You often hear that word with a particular contract. Let's start there and let's work our way back and prioritize those risks. And I think that working, Eric, coupled with working with someone on the ground who's familiar with the territory, I think that serves the clients best. Look, if the client still says, no, we need this 25-page addendum, and the hotel just says, sorry, we have other business, that's the client's choice, right? It's a business choice that
Yeah.
they make, that they didn't want to assume that. So I think in a lot of cases, I wouldn't take it blindly and say, well, that hotel never make changes to the contract. And yet I wouldn't take it the other way either, right? They're gonna upend the contract. Somewhere in between is that risk assessment and then that
Hmm.
allocation.
That's a great advice. Thank you for that. I could speak with you for hours. It's a podcast format, but I would not want to end our conversation today without asking you about AI. Same way that a lot of people would tend to diagnose themselves with, like I call the Google doctor. Today with AI, they might be tempted of looking at contracts, looking at law by interrogating Grok or ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it is, or Claude. But what is your advice with that, and how is AI really helping, changing, or being a danger when it comes to running the business for small business owners and contract?
Absolutely. I'll look at it from two perspectives, Eric. First, on behalf of my clients in the meetings industry, certainly harnessing AI in connection with their meetings. And then second, as a lawyer in my own practice. On the meetings industry side and working with clients, anytime I'm working with a client that's going to retain a vendor that's going to develop content for them, speaker, entertainer, someone to write an article, graphic design, event technology, right? The list goes on. I'll want to make sure that they have the conversation about how that vendor is going to use AI. Not necessarily that they can't use it, but how are they going to use it? Are
Mm,
they going to use it to generate ideas? Or, frighteningly so, are they going to put confidential data, personal data into one of these open source, platforms,
right.
AI? So having those conversations is important. Putting in some baseline language in the contract about it, just to make sure everybody's clear, is important too, because the value that the client is getting could be jeopardized by a misuse of AI and the rest. Also, if confidential data is fed into one of these platforms, have you violated another agreement you might have with another company about keeping it confidential and so forth? So that's the cautionary tale. But absent that, it's quite manageable, and I know that technology continues to evolve and groups should consider it and embrace it. On the legal side, lawyers are probably the most risk adverse themselves, or we counsel clients. And the one thing I think across the legal industry, the cautionary tale on AI was all of the examples of how AI went wrong. All the examples of lawyer in front of a judge that was pleading an argument based on a case that wasn't even true. Right? Wasn't thing. The AI that graduated law school, right? That we hear these things. But I will say the bar associations in the states have very much come around now to understanding that AI isn't the bad entity here, that there is a way that it can be used in the legal setting. And so I think what you're seeing across large firms and now in my own small firm, this is an opportunity for me to discover how it could be used. And I'm fortunate to get to know my practice enough to where I could understand what voids or gaps or support AI could provide in services of clients, reviews, and output, and what gaps that it might not be able to provide or that I still need to look into. And
Mhm.
so I think, I'm cautionary in my use, but I will say when I'm looking to do a task, the next task on my list, maybe it's not the client work, but it's something else of generating a summary or something, I might pause and think, is there a way that AI could help me here? Is there a way I could,
Yeah.
again, work with AI more and teach it more, so forth? Not fearing it. And again, I think the lawyers were worried about being disciplined and so forth for using it. Again, absent feeding in confidential information, I'd like to think that's not largely the concern. More so, it's not letting there are always going to be nuances in any industry that AI may not be able to cover. But if it could take you a percentage of the way there, and again, as a small business owner, absolutely, I see that value. Explore it, find out more about it. And we know as we speak, all the tools continue to improve. And
Mhm.
so I'm much more open to it in a way that I haven't been, partly as a business owner now myself, but also partly as I know that technology continues to evolve and improve. And that might make me more likely to utilize it in a way and feel like I can have oversight and oversight on that and make sure that the output, the work product, right, is something that I would stand behind.
Wonderful. Barbara, thank you so much. How do people get in touch with you?
Thanks so much, Eric. Again, it's been my pleasure. Please visit my website, barbaradunnlaw.com. Lots of resource materials. Also, you'll find videos on YouTube and other channels. I welcome collaboration in the industry. And again, thank you so much, Eric, for inviting me to be part of your important podcast and the conversation as a whole. And I look forward to reconnecting with you soon.
Same here. Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in to the Business of Meeting podcast. I hope you found today's episode valuable. If you enjoyed the show, the most important thing you can do is leave a review and share it with your colleagues. It really helps spread the word. I truly appreciate your support. And if you're ready to take your business to the next level, don't forget to visit eventbusinessformula.com to learn more about how we are helping even business owners like you. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.